You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, we've been sitting here watching Judge Cannon down in Trump's Florida prosecution pull all kinds of stunts to favor Trump, and it doesn't ever actually seem like Jack Smith is willing to actually fight back and have her removed. We finally have some good news on that front. But first, for those watching, Glenn and I wanted to take just a moment and kind of address some concerns that we've been hearing. So I know that we do these videos and we cover like the daily minutia of what's happening in Trump's prosecutions. And some of you get upset because nothing ever seems to happen to Trump, that he always seems to get away with everything. And so what's the point of any of this? And to that, look, I hear you. I agree. But that exactly is why we do this. Like, we cover this stuff because if we don't, we give Donald Trump exactly what he wants. We let him operate in complete darkness. We let him try these delay tactics, for example, where there's no scrutiny on him and there's zero media pressure out there on what he's doing. And does the pressure that we put forward work every time? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean that we don't try. And like Glenn and I, are fortunate enough to reach a lot of people. Sometimes we reach more than 1 million people a day. That drives media coverage. When we push for Jack Smith to get Judge Cannon removed, sometimes other news outlets pick it up and they repeat it. Maybe a prosecutor watches it. And so I'd rather that we do our part and speak our piece than just to do nothing because it doesn't work every time. So again, I know that this can be frustrating. It's frustrating for us. But remember, too, like if I'd asked anybody last year what you would think if I told you that Donald Trump would be contending with 4 indictments and 91 criminal charges, I think most of us could get knocked over by a gust of wind. So my only advice here is to stay in this fight. We won't win every time. Sometimes we may not even win for weeks, but I'm still optimistic that in the end, he'll be held accountable for what he's done.
Yeah, Brian, I couldn't agree with you more. We have to keep talking about this, including the minutia, the ups and the downs. Now, I feel those people who, feel like they're adrift because we are forever getting our hopes up that, here comes accountability in the Florida case or in the Georgia case or in the New York case or in the DC case. And then, we're rubbing the back of our heads, wondering, why do the back of our heads hurt? Well, it's because the rug keeps getting pulled out from under us and we reel over backwards and at least figuratively hit our heads. Think about it. The minute we all thought Donald Trump was going to have to put up or shut up a $500 million bond for the long-term fraud he was engaged in New York, a court swoops in and delivers a gut punch to us, a gut punch to justice by summarily saying, no, don't worry about it. Just put up 175 million with no explanation. So that's one example of many examples. The DC prosecution was supposed to start March 4th until the Supreme Court swooped in, delivered a gut punch, pulled the rug out from under us and said, you know what? We're going to bring it to a screeching halt because we're going to take up the absurd issue of whether an American president should be permitted to commit all kinds of crimes against the American people without being held accountable, without being prosecuted for it. But you know what? We have to keep talking about it because I actually think pressure bursts pipes. Pressure has an effect, and that's why we rely on you all. We try as best we can to distill the evidence and information and the legal developments, deliver it to you. And I know that a lot of you all are delivering it far and wide, including to your elected representatives. So, we're going to keep doing it, but trust us, we feel every bit the frustration that you all feel.
Yeah. All right. Well, to that exact point, let's get to Jack Smith. Glenn, talk about the action that Jack Smith is finally taking against Judge Cannon based on this most recent motion that he put forward.
Yeah, and I hesitate to set this up only to have somebody else deliver a gut punch. But, Brian, this feels like it could be a turning point in the litigation down in Florida in Donald Trump's classified documents, obstruction of justice, espionage case. He's charged with 32 crimes of violating our nation's espionage laws. And he has been trying to basically get out of it by saying, well, wait a minute. All of those classified documents, all of that national defense information, military attack plans on foreign countries, the nuclear capabilities of both the U.S. and other countries around the world, I designated all of that my own personal property, my own personal records, and I got to take them with me, when I left the White House down to my third-rate club in Florida and just kind of throw them around in bathrooms and ballrooms for anybody to see. This has been Donald Trump's defense. And unfortunately, the judge who was appointed by Donald Trump, Aileen Cannon, who owes her life tenure as a federal judge to the defendant in this case, conflict much, has been buying into it. And the most recent indication of that is she actually told the parties, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, to take a look at these instructions that I have in mind. And Brian, I can't overstate just how unlawful these instructions are. They basically say if a president does it, he gets to do it, and you're going to have to find him not guilty. That might sound like hyperbole, but that is the substance of these two instructions that have no basis in the law that she was offering up. Jack Smith just filed his response. She ordered Jack Smith and the defense attorneys to engage, her word, with these two proposed jury instructions, and boy, did Jack Smith engage. He said things like, Brian, I wish we could sit here and read the whole 24 pages. I'm going to read one line to give you a flavor of how Jack Smith, special counsel, engaged. Judge, your legal premise is wrong. And a jury instruction under the espionage laws that reflects that premise would distort this trial, period. And then he went on, Brian, to say, and if you try to pull this stunt, I'm paraphrasing now, we will appeal you. More precisely, we will mandamus you. What is mandamus? It's the most embarrassing kind of an appeal a judge can suffer. It's when a prosecutor asks an appellate court that sits over and supervises the trial court judge to tell the judge, do your damn job in accordance with the law. A petition for a writ of mandamus is filed when a trial court judge has gone off the rails, is acting in a lawless way, in a way that is basically not allowed under any prevailing law or precedent. And when the prosecutor is at their wits' end, they can ask the appellate court to weigh in and tell the judge, stop it, get back on track, and don't abuse your judicial discretion. Jack Smith, to say he's pulled no punches in this court filing, this is a really unusual court filing. I know because I filed things in court for 30 years. You usually don't go directly at a judge, call them out where they're wrong, and say, and if you don't stop it, if you don't reverse course, we will mandamus you. So this could be a turning point in the litigation down in Florida.
Now, he can mandamus her, he can put forward this appeal. Could this then actually serve as the basis for him to ultimately have her removed as a judge in the case?
Yeah, great question. This I see as being related to the possibility that Jack Smith will finally pull the trigger and file a motion to recuse, a motion to remove her from the case, because she's not being impartial. And she's made that clear over and over and over again in her rulings and her proposed jury instructions. So the way I see it, Jack Smith is probably collecting up as much evidence as he can to support ultimately a motion to remove her from the case. And I would say, listen, I think we were there a long time ago. I've been yelling about the need to litigate the motion to recuse in the full light of day so we can all see what the evidence is, and we can get an authoritative and hopefully correct opinion from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals on whether, she should be disqualified or not. She should be, in my opinion. But I think what Jack Smith is doing is he's been kind of collecting up all of the evidence of her lack of impartiality. I have to tell you, before this recent proposal by the judge to give these lawless instructions and Jack Smith's scorched earth response to that, I would have said that recusal bucket is probably at least half full or perhaps more. With this, I think that bucket's 90%, 95% full. I think depending on how Judge Cannon responds to being called out, the way she was just called out by Jack Smith, it may finally be time to file the motion to have her removed from the case.
So it doesn't necessarily say that he's going to or not going to, but if he is going to, this mandamus is absolutely necessary. So he's taking the steps necessary to be able to seek her removal at some point, and he wouldn't be able to do that without this.
So this, I think, is important evidence in favor of the need to file the motion to remove her. It's not a necessary predicate. In other words, he didn't absolutely have to file it as a first step on the road to recusal. It's not necessary, but it's important.
Okay. Now, you had alluded to what Judge Cannon would do next. So what are her options here? Given this like line in the sand being drawn by Jack Smith.
Yeah, that's a great question. So she can either take a step back, read this 24-page filing by Jack Smith and say, either I was wrong and I'm glad he pointed out the error of my ways, or if this isn't just sheer incompetence or incompetence alone, she might look at this and say, I've been caught red-handed trying to do something nefarious to the benefit of Donald Trump, or maybe it's a combination of incompetence and bias. We don't know. But she can really do, I think, one of three things. She can either rethink her lawless position on these jury instructions, take a step back and say, I hear you, prosecution, and I'm persuaded by the brief with supporting case law you just filed, and I'm going to abandon my efforts to use this kind of a lawless jury instruction. Or she can double down and say, I hear what you're saying, Prosecutor Smith. I disagree with you, and I'm going to give the instruction. That would be instantly a reason to file an appeal, a petition for a writ of mandamus. Or she can do nothing. Now, the do nothing path is problematic. Here's why. And Jack Smith points this out in his new court filing. If she does nothing and she just fumbles forward to the time of trial, once that jury, 12 people sitting in that wooden box as the conscience of the community, once they are sworn in, jeopardy attaches. And then if the case ends up going away based on a Judge Cannon ruling on this jury instruction issue, Jack Smith couldn't appeal it. So here's what Jack Smith says, sort of anticipating the do nothing approach by Judge Cannon. He says, should you choose to do nothing, should you not resolve this, and you move toward trial with this being an open issue, please understand you may be orchestrating a case that the prosecution can't win. He says that in almost expressly those terms. So if you're going to do nothing, you better let us know you're going to do nothing, because we will mandamus you right now. So she's on notice. Jack Smith has anticipated her possible moves here and tried to box her in. And should she choose to do nothing, whether expressly, and what I mean by that is she says, you know what, I'm going to defer my decision on this issue to a later time. Jack Smith will say, yeah, well, Judge, guess what? I put you on notice that if you tried to pull that stunt, we would mandamus you. So right now, I can't say Jack Smith is holding all the cards, but procedurally, he's covering all the bases, and it's a damn good thing he is.
Okay, and Glenn, what do you presume will happen next here, given this filing? Do you have any indication as to whether Judge Cannon will kind of relent, or do you think she'll barrel forward and walk into not this trap, but this promise, basically, that she'll be mandamused as soon as she does?
You know, it's so hard to predict what Judge Cannon will do when she's not an honest broker of the facts or the law. What is driving her, whether it's incompetence or corruption, I can't say, but it's hard to predict how a compromised judge or a judge who has no loyalty to the rule of law may react to being called out like this. If I had to guess, because it feels like she's been caught red-handed trying to orchestrate a not guilty verdict, because let me be clear, for anybody who wants to go back and read these two proposed jury instructions, they basically say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, a president has a right to do it. He can designate anything he wants, including our nation's most highly coveted secrets about, for example, nuclear weapons programs. He can take them, he can designate them personal, he can take them to his Florida resort, and you can't find him guilty. That is just how bad and how lawless and how imbalanced these proposed instructions are. I made a joke earlier when I first read these, Brian, that I expected a third proposed jury instruction saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let me instruct you that this prosecution is a witch hunt and you must find Donald Trump not guilty. It is almost that bad. A little bit of hyperbole there. But I have to believe, because she's been caught red-handed and Jack Smith has boxed her in, threatening to file an appeal, to mandamus her if she does nothing, I think she may give up the ghost. She may step back and say, okay, I'm not going to give those instructions. And then what we have to keep our eye on is, will she then find some workaround and find other ways to try to orchestrate a not guilty verdict?
Okay, and let's finish off with this. When should we expect to hear something from her? Because, again, if enough time passes where she opts to do nothing, then that's going to trigger Jack Smith's mandamus anyway. So when can we expect some type of an answer here so that we know what Jack Smith is going to do next?
You know, diligence is not Judge Cannon's strong suit. So when might she resolve this issue? I think based on the fact that Jack Smith kind of threw down the gauntlet and said, look, you do nothing at your own peril, and I will mandamus you. I have a feeling we're going to hear something from her fairly promptly. What does that look like? Maybe within a couple of weeks. I don't think she's going to let this one lie, knowing what the consequences are of her inaction.
Okay, well, we'll, of course, stay on top of this as soon as we have any updates. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along, if you're not yet subscribed, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.